Hello, MetaPlaneteers, and welcome back to another episode of MetaPlanet Madness, episode 5. Now, this is going to be a bit of a heavy episode since there are some bad news, but also some good news as well. But before I jump in, I am just going to make sure that this is streaming live on my end, so that I can pin it for the community. Just give me a quick second. Um, Bear with me. Usually, again, Klein would be the one that helps me with this. But since he is no longer a part of this episode or going forward, it's a bit hard to juggle at the same time. So bear with me. Okay. Well, I can't really do it right now. Let's see. Okay. Well, we'll just pin it eventually after after the episode. Bear with me as I share my screen. So, as always, just some housekeeping notes. First of all, this is never financial advice. This is just me as a MetaPlanet shareholder talking about why MetaPlanet is such a giga bullish investment. And because we are Bitcoiners who watch this, we also have this famous phrase, don't trust, verify. And this is a live event that is recorded and will be redistributed on YouTube under the YouTube channel Bull Standard. Also, we encourage people to ask questions in the live chat. And if you do find this valuable, please like and retweet it if you find this valuable. Again, this is going to be on the YouTube channel Bull Standard. So, what are the various themes that I want to touch upon today? So, first of all, as you guys may know, there are some good news and bad news. I will go over especially what the bad news is, but also where I'm planning to take MetaPlanet Madness going forward. Then I want to go into the meat and potatoes of this week's episode, which is talking about the new 555 plan that dropped by MetaPlanet. And then my special guest that I have brought on, Hugh, will not only help review the 555 plan, but also the napkin math that gives a price projection for the end of the year. The fourth theme is I used to be a wealth advisor right before this. And since many of us most likely will be quite wealthy during this bull run, there are some estate planning stuff that you should at least be aware of so that the government does not take potentially up to 40% of your hard-earned money. And finally, we are nothing without our community, so there will always be a community shout out. So what is the bad news first? I'm a guy who usually likes to approach bad news first. So, as many of you guys know, Climb decided to step away from MetaPlanet Madness. However, the good news is, as you can probably see in the back and forth that he and I had, he is a very gracious and professional person, and we ended on good terms. There is no bad blood, as you can read from our tweets, and also he gave me this amazing privilege to continue on with the show with potentially other guests and maybe a host down the road. So I don't want to harp upon this too much, but at the end of the day, Climb and I are still friends. We follow each other. I will always be a fan to support his work. And that's it. So if I don't know about him, but personally, I do not want to, disclose more than that, other than the fact that we ended on a good note, and that no matter what Climb does in the near future or the long-term future, I'm a fan and I'm a friend. So with that being said, I want to surprise you with our very first guest. Okay, I am going to bring on Mr. Richard Byworth. Hi, Richard. How are you?
Hey, Peter. Good to see you. Thanks
Yeah,
for inviting me on.
of course, of course. Richard, you are, for those who don't know who you are, I guess why don't you give us a little brief background on your professional background? And we can move on forward from there.
Sure. Well, look, first of all, I should apologize. I'm a little bit more underdressed than you today, Peter. I'm in Ibiza for a friend's 50th birthday, and we spoke briefly last night about the idea of coming on and doing this, and so managed to slot it in between the beach and the restaurant. But thanks again. So yeah, look, I was originally an investment banker. I started my career as a trader. I was trading convertible bonds out of London for Nomura, and then I moved to Tokyo in 2005, where I obviously was dealing firsthand with the Japanese stock market, trading Japanese converts, and selling to hedge funds on the convertible bond side. We very quickly took Nomura to the #1 spot, as Nomura should be in Japan. It's the Goldman Sachs of Japan, so it is always the house that should dominate everything within the stock market. So that's what we did very quickly. And in 2008, we acquired Lehman Brothers, their Asian and European operations. And as a result, I ended up inheriting quite a large derivatives distribution team. And so after a year of sort of making that all sit right in the sort of new construct, I ended up moving to Hong Kong to be closer to my client base. There weren't, and still aren't, many hedge funds that are based in Japan. The structure of the way the legal frameworks work are not particularly conducive to managing money in the way that hedge funds do. So Hong Kong and Singapore always had that advantage over Japan. So I moved to Hong Kong 2009, and then carried on building that business out and growing. Quickly became the #1 derivative house in the region, and then we're sort of vying with people like BNP Paribas and SocGen for many years. Then in 2017, I got to a point of feeling complete disillusionment with the financial industry, so I stepped away from dealing with Nomura, and I moved into running a crypto company, which I helped list on NASDAQ. While running the crypto company, I became a Bitcoin maxi, which was interesting because, and this is a story I often tell people, is like I had a value alignment problem. I was a Bitcoin maxi running a crypto company. I had a lot of shareholder money from people expecting me to deliver a crypto company. It was very difficult. So I went through some very difficult years doing that. Stepped down at the end of 21 because Binance came in to buy the company. I didn't want anything to do with that, so I stepped down. Then 22, I was sitting on the beach in Switzerland, and my good friend Mark Sees gave me a call, said, would you come and run the hedge fund business at Seas Capital, which I said yes, but I need a holiday. So I went on holiday for the year. And then, I joined him in October 22 with the plan to launch a fund of crypto hedge funds, which we built in partnership with Willy Woo, who's obviously quite a famous Bitcoiner. And then at the middle of last year, I was sitting with a very large Bitcoiner friend, and I was saying, maybe you should look at our fund. Dollar return is sort of 15, 20%. He's like, look, honestly, every time I sell my Bitcoin, I'm heartbroken. I can't do it anymore. And so it got me thinking about how to replicate that sort of a product with a Bitcoin denomination. So we came up with what today is called the Bitcoin Alpha Fund, designed to return 5 to 10% yield in Bitcoin. And I launched that within Seas Capital beginning of March. It was immediately the largest fund launch we'd ever done in the history of Seas Group, which is a 30-year-old banking group. We closed the fund within a month because we just ran out of capacity. So it was a big success. Obviously, demand for yield on Bitcoin is pretty high. And so, around the same, towards the end of 24, I was just telling someone this morning, the reason that I got so heavily involved in looking at Bitcoin Treasury companies is because I'd been invested with MicroStrategy since 2020, but when that 21 and 21 plan happened, my sort of previous PTSD from traditional finance kicked in. I was like, hang on, he's diluting the company by 40% just in the ATM, another 40% in the convert. and they both, well, the ATM goes live tomorrow morning. How's the stock going to trade? And I was convinced that we were potentially going to see a big drawdown. We saw the stock go up. Bitcoin was off, actually. At one point, MicroStrategy was up 2.5%. Completely wrecked my fiat financial mind. And I was just like, okay, I really need to spend a lot more time thinking about this. And then it sort of, I think there was a Swiss podcaster that found out that I used to be a convert bond trader. And so he got me on to explain that. And then that sort of went viral. And so I ended up speaking a lot about that with other podcasts. And then I realized that Simon, who actually knew from Asia, because he'd been interviewing me for YPO, had started this company, MetaPlanet, that was now doing a Bitcoin Treasury. So immediately bought that stock. And then, of course, I was talking to Simon about what his plans were. I realized they were taking a very aggressive approach, which I'd sort of concluded was the right way to be dealing with a Bitcoin Treasury company. And then, of course, as the slide shows, we had Simon on the Seize the Future podcast a month ago, not even. And stock was trading at like $2.50 then. I think it got to a lot of people. I think a lot of people discovered Simon and MetaPlanet through that podcast and just understood a bit better about what he's doing. It was only the second podcast he'd ever done.
Wow.
And so, yeah, and the first one was with Nat Brunel, who's obviously just sort of talking about Bitcoin, not really digging into the technicalities of what he's doing. So I think this was a very good podcast for people to understand. But we didn't cover a lot of stuff. I mean, like, we didn't talk about the multi-strikes, which are something quite unique to Japan, which I knew from Japan. We used to call them death spiral CBs.
Okay.
Or warrants. And because we can talk about that if you want. And then the other thing, which we haven't talked about again, which I think is a very important aspect of MetaPlanet, it's probably the reason I love MetaPlanet more than any other Bitcoin treasury, is because of the put underwriting strategy that they do. And again, we can talk about that in a bit more detail if you want.
For sure. Well, thank you for that very detailed background. We're very lucky to have you actually working at the highest levels in the Japanese markets with a deep knowledge of converts. So yeah, as we go on, in this presentation, hopefully in future episodes, we'll love to dig into more of that knowledge base. So, so can you see my screen? What do you see on my screen right now, Richard? Is it the 555 plan?
I see the MetaPlanet 2527 Bitcoin plan.
Perfect.
Yeah.
Perfect. Okay. So as everybody knows, this is the major bomb that dropped on Thursday. It is what they call the 25 to 27 Bitcoin plan, which with the ultimate goal of acquiring 1% of all Bitcoin by the year 2027. So that means acquiring 210,000 Bitcoin in roughly the next year and a half. So so before we go there, let's kind of briefly recap what has occurred since their famous 210 million plan. Okay, so for those who are not aware, they are now currently holding 8,888 Bitcoin, which means that they rank number 10 globally and number 1 within Asia. Okay, so some of the KPIs that we should be aware of is year to date, they generated 225% Bitcoin yield, which means that they was able to intelligently leverage and accrete 3,971 Bitcoin, which is tremendous in such a short amount of time. Okay, so so to get to their 1% plan or join the 1% club of getting 210,000 Bitcoin, they first need to have a 2026 target of 10,000 Bitcoin. And in order to do that, they are planning to raise 555 million shares. So this is kind of what it would look like on a quarterly basis with the new amount of Bitcoin that they're trying to acquire on a quarterly target. With, again, the ultimate goal of hitting 210,000 Bitcoin by fiscal year 2027. So let's briefly talk about the exponential ability to acquire Bitcoin. This is just a normal standard chart, which shows that this is truly exponential rate of growth. Another way to kind of look at it is their days to double their Bitcoin holdings is only 62 days. I remember just about a month ago, this number was 90 days. Now, of course, that is a standard way of looking at it. This is more of a logarithmic way of looking at it, which means that they are very much on track, if not currently exceeding their current trajectory of doubling the Bitcoin holdings of 62 days for every 62 days. Okay, so another way to look at it is kind of understanding the balance between acquiring more Bitcoin versus diluting their shareholders. So if they're looking to, so for example, when they first started this, they had, call it 141 Bitcoin, and they grew that holdings by 6,200% to its current holdings of 8,888 Bitcoin, while only diluting their shareholder base by 233%. So said another way, if there is one key metric to look for, it is Bitcoin yield or Bitcoin per share. And they've been aggressively increasing the Bitcoin yield each and every quarter. Here is probably an even better way to look at it in the regards that when they first gave out a full fiscal year 2025 guidance, they were targeting 100%, right? But now they're already 97% of their way there, which means that, they need to have a new plan that is even more aggressive than what they initially laid out. And so this is where I'm going to turn it over to Richard, who will explain a bit of their new plan of the 555 million share plan. Richard, can you, first of all, can you see this? I know it's maybe a bit small, but can you read this, Richard?
Is there a way for you to just do 100% so you don't see the slides on your left-hand side?
Yes, sir. Hold on. Let me give it
a full screen, and I'll be able to see it. There you go.
Is that better? Yeah.
Okay, so obviously they're talking about issuing another 555 million shares. They're targeting 770 billion, which essentially, I did the maths the other day, I think it's 5.4 billion US dollars of additional. I try to avoid thinking about MetaPlanet in yen just because it always confuses me. So I try to dollarize everything. But yeah, so you're talking about 5.4 billion of additional. They've got a 7.5 billion market cap as of yesterday's close, which obviously saw a huge rally in the underlying. And they're looking for a KPI target of, what is that, 600% this year?
Yes.
Which is, and if you think about, if they were to buy all that Bitcoin right here, right now, you're talking about another 55, I mean, just rough numbers, 55,000 Bitcoin. So they're increasing their Bitcoin stack by about 7 times. And doubling, or less than doubling their market cap. So it's an increase in market cap of about 92%. So this is obviously super aggressive. I think maybe we should just touch on the multi-strike warrants priced above market in Japan.
Yes.
Now, I've been reading people's tweets, and I think there's a little bit of miscomprehension or lack of comprehension here. So I just wanted to clarify the way these things work. These are a financing tool generally used by companies that are absolutely desperate for cash. They're called death spiral CBs for a reason. The reason being that if you think about what happens, so normally a company will issue them at a discount. So they'll say, okay, you can buy our stock at a 10% discount to the previous day's close every day, essentially. So basically means that some hedge fund will come into the market, short their stock. They can short their stock up to down 10%. And so they just hammer the stock down and then say thanks very much to the company and buy it at 10% discount the end of that day. Now, what Simon and Dylan have done is essentially say, well, we're not in a desperate situation. We're able to announce huge dilution to our stock, and our stock go up, as we saw yesterday, right? So
Yep.
not only should you buy it at close, which, by the way, they've been working with the hedge fund they work with, who's Evo Fund, a guy called Mike Lurch. They've been working with him for the last, 15 months. They said, okay, Mike, you've done very well out of this, even at close, at like zero price change to close. What we'd like to do is see you pay actually above previous day's close. So what does that mean? That means that Evo Fund can't come into the market and smash the stock. In fact, they will only make money if the stock's up 1-2% on the day if they're selling. So they need to be selling only when stock's going up on the day, which means this is super healthy. A lot of criticism has been aimed towards Saylor for smashing that ATM. This is really the very counter opposite of that. This is no stock's going to get sold unless the stock's moving up. So, I mean, that was kind of the case anyway, but it's even more so now because he's trading at a price premium to the previous day's close. Does that make sense to you? Is that clear?
That makes perfect sense, and I'm really glad that you have that Japanese background to explain this very first of its kind. So I love that. We zig where other people zag. Of course, we pay a lot of credence to Saylor and MSTR for paving the way, but that's why MetaPlanet is so special, is in the regards that it's not just a copycat, but rather an innovator as well. Okay, so this is interesting, though I don't want to touch too much upon the trading volume stuff, but what I do like is that they expect to execute a 6 to 10 month timeline for the full execution of the 555 million plan, which means that they're traveling at light speed, okay?
Yes.
Now, I really want to have people understand that why MetaPlanet deserves to trade at a premium to NAV. Okay, so Richard, it may be small on your end, so if you don't mind, I'm gonna read it aloud for a lot of people who's also a bit hard to see these texts. So the first one is, as we've already noted, that they already year-to-date generated 225% BTC yield. And since they're 97% of the way there, they've now upped this to 600% full-year target. Okay. And as a result of this, this is Japan's leading Bitcoin Treasury company and one of the most liquid equities on the Tokyo Stock Exchange. I think they're being humble here in the regards that they're not just Japan's leading Bitcoin Treasury company, but all of Asia's leading Bitcoin Treasury company.
Peter,
okay?
I'm going to stop you very quick. I mean, I can't see you anymore. I don't know if the audience can still see me, but I can only see the screen now.
Okay.
I don't know if it's gone
Yes. I'm just reading off the screen right now, and so other people can also follow along. But you can still hear. You can still hear me.
I can hear you. I just can't see you.
Yeah. No problem. They don't need to see my beautiful face. They can just get the alpha. So in addition, there are now being included in indices, which includes passive flows, and as they get bigger and they can perform better, they're going to get included in more and more indices, which again adds to the passive inflows. This is kind of similar to MSTR, where they got a bump through the NASDAQ inclusion, and they're going to get a significant bump whenever they do get into the S&P 500 inclusion. Okay. Also, MetaPlanet, if you listen to the word planet, they have international goals and desires, meaning that currently they're trading in 3 major markets with 100% of trading hours that provides weekly liquidity. So obviously they're a Japanese company that are trading in the Japan market. They're also available in the German market, although on very low volumes currently. And now they're also in the US market with just yesterday the news of them establishing the US headquarters out in Miami. And so I don't want to belabor all these other points, but there are many, many beautiful reasons why MetaPlanet is currently trading at a significant premium to NAV. Richard, do you want to kind of talk about, the MNAV scenario and where they target their accretion window and how that's different from, let's say, MSTR and other Bitcoin Treasury companies?
Yeah, I mean, look, what they're just explaining here is that they are getting additional yield as MNAV goes higher, right?
Yes.
So that's just the accretive dilution curve that you see.
Yes, I do want to add, oh, sorry, just real quick. I do want to add that this is a bit different from other Bitcoin Treasury companies like MSTR, where Saylor has publicly stated that he's targeting a 1.5 to 2x MNAV. While here, MetaPlanet is zigging where others are zagging in the regards that it is much more accretive at a higher MNAV. So they also updated this chart where historically I believe they're targeting a 3 to 5 MNAV, but now they've extended that to 6 MNAV. I'm sorry, Richard, I didn't mean to cut you off, bud.
No, and I think it's sort of a good segue into trying to understand why you should imagine that the MNAV in MetaPlanet is sustainable. And I think what's interesting about this is, as a reminder, there is no other way to really play Bitcoin in the Japanese stock market than MetaPlanet. And if you want to own Bitcoin in a way that is capital gains tax free, you can only do so via a NISA account in Japan, which is an individual savings account. I think you can put in 16 or 20 grand equivalent per year. And obviously more and more people are discovering MetaPlanet, putting that into their NISA accounts, but they can keep topping that up every year. I don't know when the crossover is. I remember the Japanese tax year is the same as the UK. So they go beginning of April through. So it was actually around this time that you would imagine that you should see, we're in June already, God damn it. In April, early April, you should have seen some new accounts come over. It'll be fairly consistent that you see it coming all through the year, but you'll always have new fresh money coming in at the beginning of April. So the other thing to mention, just to think about, is the Japanese, when they get behind something, excited about something, it really can get quite out of control. I remember trading SoftBank back in the early noughties, it would have been. And that stock was insane. Everybody was just going nuts. Son-san was, talking about having every part of the internet and ownership of that. And I mean, the stock would just go limit up for days and no trading. So they, the Japanese mindset and around this sort of stuff can get very excitable, which is why they have circuit breakers in the Japanese stock market anyways, to try and calm everybody down. So, the stock can only go up a certain amount every day. But, and this is the point that I made, that we had the last short squeeze a few weeks ago, is imagine you're short this stock right now. Like, you've just seen the US dollar line go up. I think it was by the close, it was 26% by the close of play. Imagine you're stuck short in the Japanese line. This is the most shorted stock in Japan. I think last time I looked at the numbers, and please correct me if you've seen more recent numbers, it was 27% of the market cap was shorted.
Yes.
And they're changing. So the way that shorts work in Japan is you have this margin account. So it works both ways. So if you're borrowing stock to go long, or you want to get leverage, you can go into the margin account, you can borrow on your account. But in the same way, you also want to see, you also have the shorts, the amount of shorts outstanding, defining the rate of the borrow, essentially. So imagine you're short this stock, the borrow rate is just going up in your face, meaning I mean, you can see borrow rates go to hundreds of percent, because if you think about it over, a week-long period, 100% is, it's not very much. It's like 30 basis points. But like once you sort of extrapolate that, it can go really far. And if you're sitting in a long-term, large position of a short in MetaPlanet, you can feel very uncomfortable very quickly. And especially when there's no liquidity, because it's going limit up. There's buy only. No one's selling there. Everyone's going to look at the dollar line and go, okay, not selling at tomorrow's limit. Monday's limit up. So it's just going to ratchet higher. And I think the next ratchet is a 300 yen ratchet. I haven't checked it, but I think that's what it was. I worked out where we closed. I think it was 1,700 or 1,650 equivalent. And actually the ratchet higher on the limit up is below that. So if you're short, you're not got an easy exit on Monday morning, and you just watched a 30% ramp in your face.
So let me ask you, Richard, real quick. So last time when that short squeeze happened, and it was probably just a week or two, some people were reporting some funny business, kind of similar to when GameStop, the original GameStop squeeze, and Robinhood somehow eliminated the ability to buy and you can only sell. Is there such shenanigans that can occur where it will allow these institutions to get out, even though it's not through the traditional channels?
So the way that borrow works in every market is through the prime brokers, right? So the prime brokers control all the borrow. And the guys on the prime brokerage desks or on the borrow desks they're like a little mafia. They all know each other. They all deal predominantly with each other. So they all know what squeezy borrow, they know what's painful borrow. And so, they're sort of all hustling around. Now they might have gone out for a few beers together and they might say, I'm getting a bit squeezy on MetaPlanet. Now, depending on how close they are with that relationship, that might work one way or the other way against them. So, someone might come and help out, but the kind of a collusion that's being implied, I don't think is as much as the market would suggest. Of course, Japan's a small market. Everybody knows each other. Everybody goes drinking in the same bars, so they all know each other very well. And these borrow desks generally are quite intertwined, let's say. But all of that said, I think that, when you get a situation like this, there are certain situations where there's nothing you can do. Like it really, the market needs to work itself out. People need to start covering their shorts. And I think that what people were talking about was the limit ups and people then mucking around with the German line because the liquidity was low to be able to push the stock price down and then open it up for people to start trading again. So that's not a million miles away from what's likely to happen. The hedge funds have big money behind them. So I'm not sitting there thinking that the hedge funds are innocent in all of this. For them to push around, what is the German stock trade? It's like $50 million a day.
Yeah, very low volume.
It's absolutely nothing for them to just push that around, especially if they're in a painful position. What I think would probably be more interesting to understand would be to speak to someone on one of these borrow desks and understand who are the big shorts and what sort of profile they are. They'll never tell you the names, but just to sort of understand the profile.
I would love that. I want to be respectful of your time, especially since you have a party, and also other people's time. I want to just get briefly through the rest of the 555 plan together with you, because then from the conclusion of this 555 plan, you have a very interesting napkin math. So just as a quick kind of summary again, they're looking to do accretive dilution through 3 to 6 MNAV. So if you look at MetaPlanet's historical MNAV chart, it's gone up to at 20x and at some point in time. So I think Richard, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think it was your interview with Simon or someone's interview with Simon, where he said historically when they had these really high spikes in MNAV, they internally contemplated, should we smash this back down to 3 because that'd be extremely accretive? But then Simon says no, in the regards that it doesn't align with shareholder value, long-term shareholder value. That's why they say, if it is in this range, they're looking to do accretive dilution. But if it runs above it, they probably will allow it to breathe a little bit more than other traditional Bitcoin Treasury companies. Okay, so
I don't.
yeah.
Sorry, I don't think that's what Simon meant. I think what he has said is that he would like to, when you've had these moments where it's run up, like in July, I think these are normally moments where he's limited in terms of what he can do because he hasn't applied for a new approval of share issuance with the FSA, the Japanese FSA. And so what he's trying to do is make sure that he can get that as quickly to market as possible to take advantage of the larger MNAV, because actually it is much more accretive to shareholders for him to use that higher MNAV. So this is why he's been doing the bond issuances. If you look at the bond issuances from, I think it was 10 days ago, that was because he clearly hadn't got the clearance approval from the FSA for the 555 plan. So he borrowed that money, and that's, if you check the prospectus, you'll see it's with Evo Fund again.
Right.
Because Evo Fund, they're happy to say, okay, you know what? You guys are doing us a massive favor by doing this trade with us. We'll lend you money for 0% because we know you're good for it. And you're about to, hand us another Christmas present with this, with this essential synthetic ATM, which is what they're helping them facilitate.
For sure. And that's the beauty of having someone like you with deep industry knowledge to clarify. So I appreciate that. I think this is a very interesting chart, right? In the regards that they are trying to project out, hey, if it's at 2 MNAV, how much Bitcoin they can acquire by year end, and that's 22,000 Bitcoin. And again, that's at 2 MNAV, which is close to like a little bit under 2.5 its current holdings. But if we're going all the way to 6 MNAV, they can acquire close to 100,000 Bitcoin. Some people now will say, there's a limited amount of Bitcoin, right? What do you think about these projections, Richard?
Well, I mean, it's basically, this is just a function of where the price is as a premium to his holdings, right? I mean, what I love watching with MetaPlanet is you have days like we've had for the last week where clearly, they've been quiet in the market because they've been waiting for this approval from the Japanese regulator. But Bitcoin's sort of been steady or slightly down or, not doing very much, but MetaPlanet has just been accreting higher. So you're just getting into a richer and richer MNAV. These numbers are purely just a function of that MNAV premium. What I do, I'm sort of a hypocrite because I say that Saylor should just smash the MNAV as hard as he can because we are in a gold rush to get as much Bitcoin as possible. But at the same time, I do really appreciate the fact that Simon and Dylan are actually very, very cautious about the MNAV and being gentle with it. And making sure that even if they're hitting it, they're not smashing it and taking advantage. Now, I think, every company that is trying to do this, if they're a first mover, and MetaPlanet are definitely a first mover, then, they've got an opportunity to get a significant amount more than any other second follower Bitcoin Treasury company is going to ever have a chance of getting. In the same way that Strategy is just miles ahead of everyone, and it's going to be very, very hard for anybody to catch them. I would say that the same situation is true of MetaPlanet. Like, they are moving with a level of aggression that I would say actually usurps MicroStrategy. They are even more aggressive. They really understand it. I think, Simon and Dylan both, they really get it. They really understand what it takes to be a highly successful Bitcoin Treasury, and they're just going super aggressive. should we talk a little bit about the put underwriting, or we can
Well,
talk about that?
no, we can talk about that another time. But this is a thread. Oh, sorry, a post that you did just back of the napkin math. Can you briefly walk people through, what you're talking about here and why you think I'm quoting you in that this 555 plan scale is way, way bigger than Saylor's 2121 plan?
Yeah, well, funny story. I was typing this as I was supposed to be directing my friend around Ibiza with my navigation, and I was too busy typing this, so we ended up just going the wrong way all the time as I was trying to figure out this maths. So he wasn't very happy with me. So basically, just from my own thinking, I try to just do the maths to figure it out. So yeah, as we discussed before, they're raising $5.5 billion. They're increasing the market cap by 75%, but they're 7xing the Bitcoin if nothing moves, if Bitcoin doesn't move, if MNAV stays essentially where we are. So if you think about what they're doing in terms of scaling up, if you remember, Saylor's 2121, it was an 80% dilution. So it was similar. But in terms of the amount of increase, there was no way that Saylor was going to be able to do 21 billion of CBs. So it was, if you think about it, it's really half what MetaPlanet are doing, and then scaling 7x. I mean, it's just absolutely massive. Saylor didn't have the same MNAV either that MetaPlanet had when he executed the 2121. So this is a level of aggression just significantly higher even than that very shocking to me back then in October 21 and 21 plan. So I really wanted to just highlight that to people, like level of aggression is something we've not seen before. So let's, talk about whether or not they buy it. Price doesn't move. We end up at an MNAV of 2 as the most conservative possible outcome. And obviously they're much smaller. So that 2 MNAV, we put them in line with Saylor, but this is a company that is, will be by that stage a tenth of the size and is way more aggressive. So there's no way they're going to be on a 2 times MNAV. If they are, there are so many more options open to them, convertible bonds, continuing put underwriting, even starting to tap maybe the pref market. But so let's say minimum, the MNAV goes to 3.5 times, puts market cap at 23 billion from 13 billion where we were at 2 times. So stock goes to $18, right? And then you think, well, all the additional things they're doing, I can't even see them being at 3 times MNAV. So probably let's say 5 to 6, which is, I think, as you said, their target MNAV now, that takes them to a $25 to $30 price. That's with Bitcoin not moving. Now, as we know, with this amount of buying happening and everybody that's playing this game trying to buy even more Bitcoin and be even more aggressive, I just don't think there's any way in hell that we end up this year at where we are now. Like, it's impossible. Like, I don't trust the Bitcoin on exchanges number, but even if you give it a sort of a very low percentage probability of being accurate, we've seen Bitcoin balances on exchange drop by 1 million or 1.1 million since previous peak in 2021. You've also had another 1.1 million Bitcoin issued into the network. So you've had 2.2 million Bitcoin swallowed by the market over the last 4 years. And you're only left with, 1.2 million Bitcoin ever to be issued? I mean, we are on a ridiculous race to get the last Bitcoin through the door, which again comes back to the point where I said everyone just needs to be super aggressive and get as much Bitcoin as they can, because then the MNAV will expand when we move into phase 2 of what these companies are going to do with all that Bitcoin. And, I talked earlier about what we do to get more return just by having that Bitcoin sat there and putting it to work in the market. So I imagine that all of these companies are going to see that evolution. But to move back to what we're talking about with the napkin maths, I think it's very hard to imagine that we're not going to be at 150, 200, which puts the price of MetaPlanet at, what is it, 38 to 50, something like that. So 38 to 60, sorry, at a 6 times MNAV. So yeah, I mean, things can get really quite spicy. And then, you know, put that all together with the fact that there's 28% of the stock short.
Yes.
And the Japanese love a bit of a frenzy. So everything is just perfectly aligned for this to push much, much higher.
Yes, and also as you talked to is they haven't even tapped into the seriously on the fixed income side nor the preferred equity side, which you know they're going to be very aggressive on, right?
Yeah.
Well, perfect, Richard. I don't want to. If you want to stay on, great. It will just take another 10 minutes. But if you want to go to your party, I can fully understand as well. I'm just going to wrap this up by talking a bit about estate planning. Now, a lot of people probably will roll their eyes and not think about taxes, right? But if
I'm going to say goodbye. I got to do my hair. You know, it doesn't happen by itself. So
thank you so much, Richard, and we will love to have you back. And again, thank you so much for your time, Richard.
All right, buddy. Cheers.
Bye. All right, everyone. I'm just going to wrap this up again by just talking briefly about saving the wealth that you created. Again, I used to be a wealth advisor and I dealt with a lot of wealthy families. And so one thing that you should be aware of, and granted, this is for primarily my US audience, is I do not know about your jurisdiction outside of the US, but this is something that will concern everyone, especially if you are sitting on a nice MetaPlanet stack. And also using the very soft back of the napkin math that Richard just projected out for us. So why am I talking about estate planning? Okay, well, there is something called an inheritance tax. So, and by the way, this changes by the end of the year. So you want to take action before the end of this year. So what am I talking about? Okay, well, there is a federal estate tax that is applied to estates over a certain threshold. So in 2025, the exemption is about 13.5 million per person, or 27 million per married couple. In other words, any amount above this is taxed at 40%. Okay, so for example, if someone dies with 30 million and leaves it to the kids, around 2.8 million will be taxed unless structured properly. Okay, and this is also assuming that this is a married couple. So how do you then avoid this estate tax? Now, this is where something called a dynasty trust or a generational skipping trust comes into play. So what is a dynasty trust? And by the way, I'm actually doing this myself with my mom. So I know exactly the intimate processes of this. A dynasty trust is a multi-generational trust designed to pass wealth down for hundreds of years without triggering estate tax every time someone dies. So the assets go into this trust. It's an irrevocable trust, which means you cannot get the assets back. And it'll be used, you'll be using your lifetime estate exemption. So again, about 13.5 million for a single and just double that for a couple. But the benefit is that once the assets are out of your estate and in a dynasty trust or a generational skipping trust, it now grows tax-free. Okay, so let's run you through an example. Okay, let's say that John and Mary create a dynasty trust. They gift 13.6 million to this trust. They apply their full lifetime estate and GST exemptions. Now this trust owns 27.2 million, and this they can own whatever within this trust: Bitcoin, real estate, businesses, whatever. And now it grows to 300 million. So what happens when John and Mary dies? Well, no estate tax is owed because the assets are no longer in their names. Their children and their grandchildren and their kids will get distributions, but they technically never own the assets outright. Okay, this avoids estate tax problem and is also an asset protection mechanism. Okay, so what are the pros of a dynasty trust and a GST trust? Obviously, it avoids that 40% estate tax. while allowing your assets to grow over multi-generations, and it shields wealth from divorce, creditors, and lawsuits, while allowing you to set rules on when, how, and who gets the distributions. Now, obviously, there's downsides to this. For example, this is irrevocable, which means once founded, you technically do not own these assets. It is complex, which is why it's important to set it up in a legal structure with a good trustee and ongoing administration. Timing matters, again, because literally the exemption limit gets cut in half by the end of this year. And obviously, this is because it's complex. It is quite expensive in legal fees, but relative to how much you can save in taxes, it's peanuts. And of course, there's funding risk, especially if Bitcoin is involved. Okay, so key strategy, especially for Bitcoiners and entrepreneurs. If you expect your net worth to rocket up, transfer it early when the valuation is relatively low. Let the growth happen inside the trust. It's state tax free, and use a grantor trust so that you still pay income tax while allowing the assets to compound untouched. Okay. Finally, I'm going to wrap this up by giving a community shout out again. Even though Climb and I are no longer co-hosts of this amazing podcast, I owe everything to him for introducing me to MetaPlanet, and I'm always going to be a fan of his work. Now, obviously, we left last episode at the halfway mark, where he only presented the first 21 reasons of why he believes in MetaPlanet. He recently also wrote the final thread, or the other half of the 21 reasons why he's giga bullish on MetaPlanet. So please go out and check it out. And finally, for all the presentation talk, it was very concisely distilled down by Edward, who kind of explained the very minutiae of this plan in a very simple to understand terms. So anyways, guys, that is it for episode 5. I will continue on with MetaPlanet Madness, whether with Richard or other amazing guests. If you do have any suggestions on other guests and potentially other hosts, I'm always open to comments. But until then, I'll see you guys next time. Take care.